Hello. So I'm not able to make it to class, so I'm recording this video um, this night so that you look at it in the morning. We want to create a list view of data that has been fetched from an API from the internet. And at the end of the day, this is what you need to be able to achieve. Of course, you can improve the user graphical interface and make it more meaningful. For now, I want us to focus on how we can do this operation. So this is our main. We have, material app, safe area, scaffold, app bar, fetch data is on here. And then for the body, we have a list view, which is what I want us to create here. It's going to be a stateless widget. We'll just call it my list view. That should clear this error. So that's what we have. We run this, should clear the error. We don't even have to run it, but we can clear this so that we start from the beginning. Now, when we want to fetch data from the internet, we first must start by adding this HTTP package on the pubspec file. You can get that from this particular repository, and we've talked of pub.dev before. We've picked some packages there. If you just type HTTP and copy this, you'll be able to paste that here and then get pub get. And then after that, you need to go to the place where you want to use that particular package and paste this import statement here. You can easily get that import statement from right here. Once you have those two things done, you have this package here, you have the HTTP package on pubspec file, then we can get started. What do we want to do? We want to fetch data from this API right here. This data is in a format known as JSON format. JSON is the format systems use to exchange data over the internet. And why we need to use JSON string is because it is structured. For example, you can see an element here, one album with this ID, with this URL and all that. It is structured. It's not just like any other string that looks like a paragraph. And so JSON strings are used to exchange data over the internet. We need to be able to pick this data from the string and represent it in our list view and render these images, because like what you're calling the thumbnail here, it's actually an image. If I take this URL and put it here and run, it's going to load. It's going to load an image. So we need to be able to represent this, and in future classes we'll be coming up with the API so that it returns this kind of data, and then we represent it on our JSON on our file. Where do we start? We must start by first creating a model. You remember the MVC structure we talked about, model view controller. We know what goes into the controller, that's the code. We know what goes into view, that's the user graphical interface, and then we now need to talk about the model. In the model, we are going to create classes that represent what we are dealing with. For example, when you go here, this API, we are dealing with photos. We are dealing with an album, looking at this data. So if it was a student software, we probably would create a model called student, but for this one, we can create a model called album. The best place to put this would be inside your model folder. For now, because I've not organized my MVC, I'll just put it here. So I will write that. I'll just call it album model. For you, when you have a folder called model, you can just call it album, because everything inside that folder is a model. This is a simple class, really. Album. It's a class, represents how an album needs to look like. So let's declare what our album will have. For simplicity, and so that this video is not long, I'm not going to read this data that I don't need. I'm only going to focus on the title and the thumbnail. So every of my album should have a title, final title, and final album thumbnail. For simplicity, I'll call it image. So every of this must have this. Then immediately I will create a constructor to help me read this data. Generate, insert constructor. I will need to use the two properties and click on OK. I will need to wrap this with this so that the required fields, and then add the keyword required here, so that whoever needs to use this constructor, then they need to pass these two things required. One more thing, inside this function or this model, I will need to have a function that receives the JSON string, this one, and converts it into an album. So that can come in here. Excuse me. To achieve that, we will use what we call a factory. And this factory, we will create an album from JSON string. Create album from JSON. This is what we need to do. So, and then after that, we are going to return this album that we have created. So how are we going to do this? Going to get this from map, and this data is coming from, we want to convert it to from string, and it's a map of string and dynamic. Why am I using dynamic? Because the data that we are getting from JSON here, you can't tell whether it is string, it is integer. That's why we are calling it dynamic. So that's what we have here. I'm going to put this here, and then, am I missing anything here? Then return, after we get this data, we're going to create a JSON string, JSON. Okay, just a minute. I think I'm missing something. And then return an album. Album. There's something I'm missing here. Or this needs to look like this. So once we have this data, there's something I'm missing, but I'm gonna get it. Just leave that for now. So once we have this data, we will now convert it into an album. And to get that album, we will use this JSON that we've just declared here. And just see what I'm gonna do with this. So I'm going to write JSON here again and put quotes here, and then go to my API here and look for the string that represents the title. This is actually a key. When you look at this JSON string, it's organized into key and value, key and value. So we want, because you know the values can change, but the keys don't. So we want to use the keys to get the value. So use this and use this so that we get the image, because our album is made of just the type, the description, and the album. Anytime you have return, we need to terminate this with a semicolon. What am I missing here? Map string from JSON. Yeah, just that simple. In other words, what you're saying is map the string to dynamic as JSON, and then we can use JSON to extract those values. When we are done, with that done, we are done with the model that we will use to represent an album. Now, let's go to my list here. This is what we want. In this, we want to not return a placeholder, but we can return a scaffold. I know by now we are familiar with this. Inside the scaffold, we don't need an up bar, because if you put an up bar, you'll have this one that reads fetch data, and you're going to have another one. Let's just deal with the body. In this body, we can return a list view. List view, because we want to represent a lot of information, and I will use list view builder, this one right here. List view builder takes in two important things. Number one is the item. Number two is the builder. Those two things. Let's push this here. So what is the item builder? Sorry, number one is item count. You have item count right here, and then the builder. Now, let's assume we have 5 items. We'll come back to that. The builder, what does it take? This builder needs context and index. I think we've done this before. 2 things. Then after that, we enclose this because this is what builds the item for every. This is what builds the item. Each item for the list view. List view has many items. Each item is built through this. So let's return a column, and in this we put children, and this is what we want to do. Text. This will represent the title, and the next one will be an image dot network, and this will represent the what? This will represent I'm thinking of using a row here so that we have the title and then the image. Okay, problem. Just for we don't really need to worry about the appearance. So every time we have return, we have to terminate it with this. Am I missing anything? Let me clean this up. Let's read this error. Expected. Okay. Expected what? Okay, sorry here, right here. Sorry. Okay, so we are good. We can run this if you can. It will just show the title 5 times and then no image is being loaded. Now we are okay till that far. What we now need is to now read the data from the API. This is okay because we have not done anything yet. What we now need to do is we have our model, we have where we want to represent the data. Let's now read the data from the API. To do that, we need a function. So I will select build function, and just below it have another function. We'll call it get album. It is a function. So now it needs to look like this. Right here, first we need to declare a variable called response, which is what we will use to store whatever comes from the internet. So HTTP, some of you already know these HTTP verbs, post, get, put, car. Because we are reading from an API, we need to use get. So I'll select that. Get requires a URL, and it's not a string, it's a URL. So to convert our string, what string? This string here. To convert it to a URL, we're going to use something called URI dot parse. This will be able to convert our string to URL. So copy, put it here, the string. So I'm going to quote, the quotation mark, do this. But there's one more thing. When we are reading from the internet, we are accessing data that we might not have so much control of. So we don't know when to expect it. And so we will tell the computer not to just proceed and generally how a computer executes code. Executes this statement, immediate after that goes to execute the next one. The problem is if it moves to execute the next one and we've not received any response yet, there will be a problem because we don't know what could happen when we go read this. It could take longer. So what we do, we tell the computer before going to the next statement, wait until we have a response. So the moment you use await in this function, then we must make this function async. That is very important. Those 2 things, await, why wait? So that it doesn't proceed to use response immediately after executing this statement because it could take time to read this. So the moment you put await, then you have to make it async. Let's go to the next thing. Now, once we have received a response, we now need to find out what is in this response. And Those of you that have done some bit of web technology, you know that when we make HTTP calls, we have what we call status codes. And one of the best, not best, one of the green lights that we can get from HTTP is when our status code reads 200. That it actually means okay. So this is what you're going to do. If status response code is okay, we're going to now look at what response we've received right here. Else, what does this mean? If it is not okay, if it returns any other status code, am I missing some semicolon? Okay, if it returns, yes, I think I need one here. If it returns any other status code other than 200, you can do something here, like throw an error, throw uh, reading failed. That's an error to be thrown. Now, let's go back here. This response, what do we do with it? First, we need to convert it to a JSON string. Remember, it is just this thing here. So we need to decode it. So let me call this JSON response is equals to response body. Previously, we have accessed the status code. Now we need to access the body and then JSON decode this. So JSON dot decode so that we convert it to something else. It's a JSON string. We need to decode it. Once it is decoded and it is stored inside the JSON response, now this JSON response can be converted into an album, and that's what we want to do. So look at how I'm going to do that. Actually, JSON response dot, we have map here. Okay, what do I want to do? I'm looking for the right method. We've converted it to this. Okay, let me see what I think I had told you about what this is what I had not told you about. This is a tutorial which you can follow in case you're stuck. Oh, I got it. Yeah, we have map here. It's just the data type. JSON response. What is to lists? Yeah, because it's not lists. When it's var, it's not, the data type is not decided, and therefore we are not getting the function that you're looking for. So I'll select map, because what we intend to do is to convert this response that we've received into an album using this function. Remember this function we declared? We said once you give it a JSON string, it will convert that JSON string into an album and return it. It's exactly what we want to do here. So E, or you could change this to anything that you want, album, then call that function album, the function that is on the other side, album. Okay, album dot from JSON string, that method listed. I've imported album here, not yet. Okay, that's what we need to do. Import album so that it brings it here, and then we can get the method that is defined there from JSON string. The same album, this variable now, this variable, then semicolon, and then we return this. Remember now this is an album because it will go to this code and convert it into an album, and now we have an album here. Let's do a few things here. This is a single album, but would like it to be many albums. So first, we need to convert this to list so that we get many of them. And it's not just a list of any other thing, it's a list of albums. You see? List of album. So that means we need to now change this to list because it's going to bring many albums, not one now. So you convert it to list. But we also need to change this to a future. Any function that expects something that will be coming into the future needs to read future. So now we convert this into future. Please, this function is so important. You need to listen over and over until you get it how we built it. We started with just this one word. We went to await, async, all that. Just make sure you get that. What we have now, I can close this, we are way past that. We have our model, a function to convert JSON string to an album. We have a function that can actually invoke the API and then convert the data that you are getting from the API into an album. And the only thing that is left is now how to pass those albums to our list view. Let's go there. This list view is awaiting data that will come in the future. In the future is a time that we cannot determine. When we use future here, we are talking of time that we cannot determine. Since it will display data coming from a future, a time that we cannot determine, we're going to wrap this with another widget called a future builder so that it is not built immediately, it will be built in the future. There you go. Future builder takes two things. You can click Alt and specify it takes builder and future. So let's have the builder and then the future. Future is just anything that returns data in the future. Do we have something that returns data in the future? Yes, get album. So I'll copy this and put it here. What are we left with? The builder. The builder is a function that passes two important things. Number one is context. The next thing is what we can call snapshot, or just the data, really. I could use the word data. Actually, let me use data. That's the data. The next one is the context, and it is a function. So it is here where we are going to build our list view and return it. You can actually write return and go here, cut your list view, the one that you already had, cut it, put it here, because that's what we will return in the future. We now don't need this. Anytime you have return, you're going to have to use semicolon. So what you're saying is this particular part, what you're saying in this particular part is future will come from this function. It will bring something back into the future. Then when we have that, we can use the builder function to build the list view then. Now, what we need is to get this data that has come from the future and display it on this list view. Before we do that, there's a possibility that this data never comes or the data has nothing. We cannot attempt to build a list view if there is no data. So let's first check that. If data dot has data, that's when we are going to build this list view. Return is here, so put it here. Only if it has something, that's when we are going to build this list. So we can have else here. Since we expected to return something, if there is no data, we can just return a text view which fills the screen there, and we can just say no data. If you are dealing with orders, you would say you have not placed any order yet. You have no orders yet. If nothing comes, then that's what we're going to display. Why is this one complaining? Might completely cause null to be returned. Is that so? Where is our else? No problem. Let's first continue. Now, let's take these values and display them here. First, now item count is not fine. Item count will be given by data dot data dot length. That is what will give us the size of the data that we are dealing with. We're going to, you have to use this symbol here. Let me see what. Sorry, not there. Here. It just means this data might have no, or this list might have no data. This symbol or operator means it could be null. And so instead of the program crashing, we want to tell the compiler to be aware that it could be null. Now, the title. Let's display the title here. So data dot data into index. I will explain this dot get the title right here. See, this data has a lot of albums from this function. This converted whatever we got from JSON into many albums. So which album do we want to access? We have to use index to start from the 0th all the way to the last one. Again, we are going to have to use this. This means null check. We are saying that value cannot be, we are sure it cannot be null. That is built around a concept we call null safety. One of the major problems with Java is the fact that it keeps running into null issues and programs crashing. And that is one of the things that seeks to fix, so that anytime we expect no data, then we are telling the computer. Anytime the variable could have no data possibly, we inform the compiler in advance. Now, let's do the same thing here. Where do we get the image from? Data dot data into index dot image. This one here, it will give us the URL. Again, we have to tell the compiler we are sure we can never get here without this. And you can be assured, because the fact that we have checked whether there is data, then we can be sure by the time we get here there is data. I want to deal with this last problem here. Might return null. So instead of, or do I want to do, if this is this, return this. Okay. Most of the times when you're expected to return something and you have nothing to return, just throw something. Huh? So I'll just say throw no data. And the thing goes silent. It's really fun when you know how to work around these things. So when you are expected to return something and for a reason you don't know what to return, or there is nothing to return, like if there is no data, really what do we return? We can just throw no error, no what? No data, and then it keeps quiet. People, we are done. I'll run this. I hope I don't get an error. I like it when I write a program for the first time and I have no error without having to repeat. Oh, I have an error. No data. Yeah, it was just reading. The data is there. Where on earth are my images? It was still reading. So we are done. That's what we needed to achieve. Let me, in 30 seconds, go back through. Go over this. What did we do? On the pubspec file, right here, we added the HTTP. We imported the HTTP file here, because this is where we want to have the list view that is fetching data from the internet. We created a model of what we are reading from the internet order. We would put in the right thing: student, car, the right properties. You know a class, what that should describe. Then after that, we go to my list. We create the function that we will use to fetch the data. This function returns data into the future. This data is in form of a list, and it's a sync because we have used the keyword await. Once we check, we get the response, we check whether it is 200. If it is 200, we go back. We go ahead and decode the body and then use the function that is in here to convert that body into an album or whatever our class is. And then once we are done with that, call that particular function within the future here because it returns data into the future. Then builder, pass context and data. And right here, we now have the data that we want to represent into our different lists. So the task that you have for today is to do this exercise. Use the same API here, and I think I can send some of these resources into your WhatsApp group, the URL, and some of the other resources that can help you uh, do what? Enhance your skill around reading data from APIs. Enjoy the rest of your class. I'll see you in the next class. Thank you.